If you're watching this film, it's likely that you've had recent experience of a spinal cord injury, either directly as a patient or indirectly as a family member, friend, loved one or colleague. Spinal cord injury often happens suddenly, so it's particularly traumatic for everyone involved. Fear, confusion and frustration are inevitable. You're desperate for information. We've made this film to help you to better understand what spinal cord injury is, and also to understand some of the possible implications. This information should help you when you discuss specific issues with members of your medical team, because the better you understand the condition, the easier it is for you to prepare and to start to cope. The spinal cord is basically a bundle of nerve fibres, like communication cables running from the brain to all parts of the body. It's a two-way message system, carrying instructions from the brain to move muscles, for example, and back to the brain, returning sensations such as touch, heat and cold. The spinal cord runs inside the spinal column, protected by linked bones called vertebrae that are joined by softer cartilage discs for flexibility and cushioning. It's a very strong but not invincible structure. As the spinal cord passes down the spinal column, it branches out at different levels to reach all parts of the body. If the spinal cord is damaged by injury or disease, this link between the brain and the body can be completely or incompletely affected. A complete injury means no sensation or control below the level of damage. An incomplete injury means partial sensation or control. The level at which spinal cord damage occurs is important because it can determine the extent of the resulting paralysis. Injuries are referred to using two general terms. A low-level or back injury is often referred to as paraplegia. With paraplegia, a patient typically loses control over their lower body, but they retain varying degrees of control over their upper body and arms. Higher level or neck injuries may be referred to as tetraplegia. With tetraplegia, patients lose control over more of their body, and in extreme cases this may affect functions such as breathing, which will require additional treatment. But through all this, it's important to remember that every patient is unique, and the long-term outcomes for each patient are different. When someone suffers a traumatic injury, we often expect a frenzy of medical attention to fix the problem. With spinal cord injury, things can be different. Urgent intervention can be invaluable, such as surgical fixation to stabilize the bones of the spinal column and prevent further damage to the spinal cord inside. But surgery is not always appropriate. For many patients, the key treatment is a period of extended immobilization in bed. This is known as conservative care. Conservative care involves around-the-clock care over time to allow the patient's body to stabilize. Because it can be many weeks before a patient can even sit up, treatment can at times seem frustratingly slow. But conservative care is an essential part of spinal injury treatment. It involves crucial tasks such as bladder and bowel management, and regular turning to avoid bed sores, also called pressure sores. Immediately after a spinal cord injury, the human body reacts by automatically shutting down parts of the nervous system. This is called spinal shock. Spinal shock is a temporary reaction whereby the body protects itself from further damage. Spinal shock may last for many weeks, and whilst it can mask the extent of any permanent damage, it can also mask any opportunities for restored function. So this period tends to demand a wait-and-see approach. Medical professionals understand that this is a particularly worrying and uncertain time. People such as doctors, nurses, physiotherapists and occupational therapists, these issues are part of their everyday work. But for you, it may be all new. Because of this, we've invited past patients to share their stories.
About 3 years ago, when I was 16, I had a car crash. I was out with a party and I was on my way home and just didn't make it home, really. We had a designated driver to take us home responsibly, and it just went wrong. It's really hard having your accident so young at 16, because you've just come out of school and you haven't experienced life yet. My best friend was also in the accident with me, that although she broke her neck as well, she came out of it okay. But we find it hard to talk to each other and be in company together. So we had to disconnect and live our own lives separately. We couldn't build new memories because it was just constantly, oh, do you remember when we did that? It just did our heads in. And every time we met each other then away, I just cried because it was just so hard. The very first part is quite a blur. Just stare at the ceiling and just listen to the noises around you until the next person comes in. It's just like a continuous circle. I don't think anybody ever told me why I was there. I think you just pick up on it as you go along. I just don't think people wanted to tell me, that's why I was never told. It included my mum. I think the only thing that got me through those first few weeks and months was talking to other people in the rooms with me, because we're all in the same situation. The funny thing is you feel like you know them so well, but you haven't got a clue what they look like. I think my real low time was coming out of hospital, because you get your discharge date, you're over the moon, really excited. You think, I'm going to move on with my life now, this is it. And then I come home and it's like, wow, I'm in a wheelchair. And then you come out of that and then it really does get better and you become a stronger person because of it. Even before my accident, I really enjoyed doing textiles and like interior design. So I was determined to carry that on. Obviously, one of the things involved in textiles is using the sewing machine. So I was a bit worried whether I could use it, and my textiles teacher was also a bit worried. So I had to work really hard to prove to her that I could do it. I'm one of the lucky ones to have a big enough house for me to get around in. And I've decorated it in my own way and put my own personal stamp on it. And people comment on that and say, does it look like a disabled person's house? Which is what I really wanted. I'd love to learn more and extend on my textiles and perhaps one day have my own business, interior design business.
My accident was, I was on my way to work on my bike, there was some roadworks going on, and this dumper truck just pulled out in front of me and the guy just wasn't looking.
I didn't know that you could live through a broken neck. And this doctor just stopped me, took me into a room and said, you know what, he's very seriously injured, he's got a broken neck, and you have got to smile. And I went up to the bed, I went, hiya, and he just looked at me and said, well, you took your bloody time, didn't you? And I just thought, okay, I can do this because he's the same. I don't know how I thought he would change, but I thought he would change with a broken neck, but it was the same guy.
I guess the biggest worry is obviously how the relationship might change for the future, or what's going to happen in the future. But the best thing to do is not to put too much pressure on the relationship and just let it flow and see what happens, I think.
It made no difference to me whether Phil was able-bodied or paralysed. It truly didn't. And people say, oh, you must feel differently. And you just don't. I didn't. And I still don't. If you're in a new relationship or you're brand new injured and you're both sitting there looking at each other thinking, oh my God, I think the most important thing to do is relax and try not to overthink the situation. Don't try to put pressure on each other to make decisions. There are no decisions to be made. The only decision to be made is how you're going to get through the next week.
There were some very dark times, obviously not being able to move in bed. But I think you just have to get on with it.
I was frightened and scared and hungry, and he, you know, ordered the nurse to get me some food and started to look after me. Even though he's laying there completely helpless in head traction, he took control of the situation. And that for me was brilliant.
Kay and I decided fairly early on that we still wanted to be able to travel. And obviously 20 years ago, things weren't very accessible. We didn't know how it would be by going abroad.
We've had amazing experiences all over the world, and we save our pennies and we go, and accessibility across the world has improved in leaps and bounds. Phil and I believe nothing is more important than making your home environment as accessible as possible. We've just done our bathroom that's taken years to plan and done it exactly as we wanted it, and it's an absolute beauty, and it doesn't look like a hospital.
I would say to somebody that's newly injured that don't panic and don't worry initially. Try and relax and go with the flow for the time being, till you feel able to start having a crack at things. And then not to let obstacles get in your way if you can help it. And don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. And just try and be positive, because life can be very good.
When I tell people I broke my neck skydiving, it always sounds very dramatic, but actually it was just another day, another jump. I'd done several hundred before, and this one was no different from the others, except that when I came into land, I was going too fast, and I touched down feet first, fell over, and couldn't get up. It was about 3 weeks after my accident before I was told the implications of what I'd done. The paralysis was permanent, and that I wouldn't walk or use my hands again. And I remember feeling quite furious that everybody else had known this for 3 weeks, but nobody had told me, although the reason they hadn't told me was for my own benefit. It still felt, I still felt very angry about it. It was a great shock to everybody who knew me and for me to find out that I was paralysed, but my family felt that I was very positively dealing with it and that they needed to support me in that. And I felt that they were very positive in the way that they were supporting me. So we very much fed off each other's positivity and really worked, I think, all together with the theory of just dealing with one day at a time and coping with a little bit when we were ready to cope with it. Friends, some of them immediately wanted to come and see me and were amazing, and others, to this day, 8 years later, have never come and seen me because they've not felt they've been able to cope with it, and that was quite difficult for me to get to grips with. But in hindsight, I think I understand totally. If I were in their situation, it might be very difficult to go and see somebody who previously had been so active and suddenly had been confined to a bed on bed rest, coping conservatively with their injury. If I could give somebody one piece of advice, if they just had a spinal cord injury themselves, it would be to not worry about things that are outside your control, to not worry about what you should be doing at work or at home, but actually just to deal with your injury just one day at a time. Give your body the time to do as much healing as it can, and just think about being as relaxed as possible.
My wife, Glyn, came off a horse. I knew then, at the moment of the fall, this was serious. For the first few weeks I was lost, miles away. I wasn't in control of anything. I probably didn't even realise that I was in control. Until as time went by and I realised that I needed to pull myself together and pull everything together. I wasn't a person of routine, but I felt when Glyn had the accident and things were moving on that was the only way forward. Routine helped me get some balance back into my life.
Before my accident, I'd been a really independent person, and now suddenly I was in this position where I could do nothing for myself. I think I found the most humiliating part of being in hospital was letting the nurses do all the personal things for me, like my bowels or showering me. I just found it so embarrassing. I cried myself to sleep and just couldn't cope with it. But then you realise that, well, everybody else is having it done, and if they don't do it for me, I'm going to be ill. So you just have to put up with it and come to terms with it.
Being in hospital can be seen as a negative. But at the same time, if you reverse that, it can be a positive. Being in hospital with people with the same problems, mothers, fathers, friends, and indeed patients, of course. It's sharing without knowing. It can be good. It is good.
When I first had my accident, I couldn't see anything positive coming from it. But then after a while, you start to realise that actually, it's not about what I can't do, it's what I can do. Before my accident, I was so busy rushing around, doing so many things, that I never had time to stop and think. After my accident, I realised that actually I had time and I could use some of my creative talents to do things like sculpting and art, things I never had time for before. And now I'm finding that my life is actually quite fulfilled because I am doing things that I really want to do. John and I are probably closer together now because we share things. I don't think I had time to share things before. It was all about being independent. Now I want to share.
I was at a party about a year ago. I'd had a few to drink and dived into a swimming pool and broke my neck. Being 6'4" in a 4-foot deep pool, not the best idea I've ever had, really, diving in. The main consultant in pool, he said to me that you've got a 50% chance of walking. So I was like, no, you can jog on. I don't want to know, I'll be fine. He went, okay, probably with that attitude you might be.
We've lived in Christchurch, both of us, most of our lives. We'd never actually met. We were in hospital in opposite beds, but Sam had to stay flat, and I couldn't get out of bed, so we never saw each other. It was late at night, about 3 in the morning, and as I was driving home, I came over the brow of the hill. There was a fox in the road, and like an idiot, I swerved. We went through the trees, the rear end of the car hit a tree. The impact of the tree pushed the engine into me, which broke my neck, and then the car ended up in a field and in flames.
I was really lucky. I think I ended up being able to walk again, but the first few weeks were just a lot of emotions. A lot of friends and family have been affected by it, and all of a sudden I've got to rely on people to help me do things, and some of my friends are quite scared to be around me, or were, through fear of either hurting me and making me worse, or just not knowing what to do.
You've got to really, really try and relax and let your body do what it needs to do, because it will. Your body is amazing. But I was kind of in denial from the beginning, because I could feel my feet. I thought I was going to get up and walk out of hospital in a few weeks. And then as it goes on, you kind of settle in to the injury. And then you come suddenly down to earth as the weeks progress. And you realise you have got to work with what you've got and not try and achieve something that probably isn't going to happen because of the injury you've sustained. The town is just down the road. Pubs and that is fine. and like Nelly, my PA, is brilliant. So we go to the pub, and it'll be like, right, drink, and like I said, beer through a straw, it's not good. So Nelly will feed me my pint.
Looking back at being in hospital, listening to what the doctors would say, they'd ask you to do things you just wouldn't want to do it. But I think it's best if you do it, because...
Yeah, totally. I protested a lot at first against, you know, things the consultant would tell you to do. He'd say it and you'd think, what? Are you crazy? But now, a year down the line, you realise they know what they're talking about. And if at first you don't like it, you know, do it for a while and then talk to them and see what they say. If it's really not working, then you might not have to do it, but definitely follow the doctor's orders.
Yeah, they're there for your benefit at the end of the day, aren't they?
Totally. It has changed my life totally, but it gave me a fresh start. You know, now I'm all settled, I've got a new place, and life is good.
In a sort of morbid sort of way, it's probably the best thing that's ever happened to me having this accident. Physically, it's not. Physically, it's the worst thing that could have possibly, but mentally, I'm happier, and I've sort of, in a stupid little way, I know who I am.
In making this film, we want to help everyone involved to see a way forward. It's quite normal to want to know what the future holds and to want to plan ahead. But with spinal cord injury, especially in the early stages, it sometimes helps to take each day at a time. The professional care team will develop a plan of action. This will involve not just the doctors and nurses on the ward, but physiotherapists, psychotherapists, and even a logistical team to help with a broad range of issues such as grants, government assistance, and returning home when the time comes. The care team know that you'll have a lot to deal with, both emotionally and practically, so they'll be prepared to help you at each stage. With spinal cord injury, you come to realise that it's impossible to make promises and hard to make predictions. But the patient stories in this film show that it is possible to rebuild a good life after injury. For some, it's possible to participate in competitive activities, creative activities, or even to return to work. So, whilst the future won't always be easy, one can definitely find reasons to be positive.